Chapter 1. Pre-Planning. You might have an idea in your head of what it would be like to wake up in the French countryside or to watch the sunset on a beach in Australia. But without a proper plan, these ideas are just dreams. But don't worry. While this stage can require a bit of work, it is so much more exciting to have a tangible plan in place. Stage 1. Here are some tips on planning out your dream trip before you even have an idea of where you're going. 1. Start saving money right now. It doesn't matter if you're planning on going somewhere in the next few weeks or the next few years. Having money saved up is the #1 priority. After all, unless you're one of those lucky ones who have your way paid, you're going to need money for the flight, transportation, accommodations, and activities. And while this guide is intended to help you save money on your trip, it's necessary for you to scrounge together all that you can. One of the easiest ways to start saving money is to set up a budget or download an app that will allow you to funnel some of your money into your travel fund. 2. Make sure all your ducks are in a row. In this guide, flexibility is going to be key, and you can't be flexible if your paperwork isn't in order. For instance, if you get a travel opportunity next week and you can take it, you're going to want to make sure that your passport is current. So if you need to update your passport, do it right away. Don't wait until you have your travel plans. Another thing that a lot of people forget to consider is international health insurance. It may not be the most exciting thing to think about this early in the game, but trust me, if you get it out of the way early, you'll be less stressed later on. 3. Have a reality check. Your trip isn't going to be like the movies. And that's a disappointing realization for a lot of new travelers. But stick with me for a moment. Your trip isn't going to be like the movies because it's going to be so much better. You're going to learn more than you ever would from a 90-minute film. You're going to make connections with real people, not characters. And you don't have to look perfect every time you step out into the world. So the moment that you let go of the expectation that your trip is going to be like a scene from Eat, Pray, Love, you free yourself up to have a unique, authentic experience. Letting go of the Hollywood version will also allow you to think about the places in the world that aren't normally featured in films. Places that get all the screen time, think Rome, Paris, London, are wonderful. But they're also expensive and overcrowded. And just because a place hasn't made it to the big screen doesn't mean it isn't worth your time. So in these early stages of planning, keep an open mind to the off-screen wonders of the world. 4. Make a list of your perfect vacation. Don't be too specific here just yet. You're thinking more about climate, types of food you like, and whether you're comfortable in crowded places. Jot down the longest list you can, and if you need some help, here are some questions to get you started. Do you prefer cities or small towns? What's your ideal location? Beaches, mountains, forests, jungles, plains, deserts, etc.? Do you imagine yourself relaxing at a spa or hitting all the museums? Do you want to travel like royalty, or are you okay living without the finer things for a while? What kind of food do you like? Spicy, savory, fried, vegetarian, light, creamy, traditional, fusion, gourmet? Some countries will offer dishes that are varied, flavorful, and complex. Others will offer more traditional meals made with simple ingredients. If you're a picky eater, then you should consider how far out of your comfort zone you're willing to go. On the flip side, if you're an adventurous eater, you might want to steer clear of places that have a food history of hearty, practical meals. What's your weather tolerance? I, for one, get super cranky in humidity. So while my dream of spending a week on a tropical island in the Philippines was perfect in my head, it was quite a bummer to find myself with frizzy hair, swollen feet, and absolutely no desire to go out of my air-conditioned hotel room. My travel buddy, on the other hand, was totally fine with the weather and spent the whole time soaking up sun on the gorgeous beaches. What's your crowd tolerance? Some of us flourish in busy cities, others are totally overwhelmed. 5. Set your intention. Now that you have an idea of what you would include in your dream vacation, it's a good idea to think more deeply about your intention for the trip. This is going to help you figure out what kind of experience you're looking for and what you should plan to make it happen. Obviously, this isn't supposed to feel like homework. It's just a way to get you thinking about what this trip is going to mean to you, and it will serve as a helpful reminder during your trip in times of flux or confusion. Here are a few ideas. I want to be open to new experiences. I want to learn how people live in other places. I want to meet new people. I want to enjoy other cultures. I want to learn about the history of the country I'm visiting. I want to challenge myself to eat different foods. I want to challenge myself to learn a new language. You might be thinking to yourself that these are all obvious. Of course you want to open yourself up to new experiences and learn about other cultures. In fact, you may even strive towards all of the intentions I listed here. But here's the thing. If you don't think about what you want to get out of the trip, if you don't acknowledge it in a direct way, you might not remember those things when you're actually abroad. Here's how it usually plays out. You travel abroad with all those feelings of excitement, but no intention. Then when you realize how different things are abroad, you may naturally gravitate towards what is comfortable and familiar. It's not that you're not open to trying new things. It's just very easy to fall back into old ways. It all boils down to our psychological desire to maintain the status quo. Change is stressful, and if we're not paying attention, our minds will automatically default to what we know. To put it another way, you'll find that opening yourself up to new experiences, whether it be trying new foods or meeting new people, takes more conscious effort than you might expect. And when you have set an intention to do something, it becomes much easier to focus on those conscious efforts. When you remind yourself, I'm here to try new foods, for instance, then your mind will focus on the parts of the menu that are foreign to you. When you remind yourself, I'm here to meet new people, that thought can serve as the confidence boost you need to go up to someone new. So when it comes to setting an intention for your trip, allow yourself to write it down or simply carry it with you at the forefront of your mind. Because even if you feel that it's something really obvious that you would probably do automatically, the truth is that culture shock is much stronger than you might expect. 6. Write down 3 things that you need to feel comfortable. When you're traveling, no matter how flexible you think you are, there will still be some things that you can't live without. Or maybe you can, but you'll be miserable. I, for instance, have a hard time if I don't have my own room and access to coffee in the morning. I can do without these things, obviously, but they're pretty important to make me feel comfortable. 7. Find your money personality. We all have different ways of thinking about money. I am usually a pretty good saver, for instance, until I find myself in a used bookstore. I also know that I'm willing to spend more money on living accommodations that will give me my own room. When you're figuring out your unique money personality, you might consider how much money you think you'll be able to save up and what your current spending habits are. This will allow you to choose a country that is the best for your budget. 8. Compare your money personality to your lists. When you look over your lists, you'll be able to see what kind of trip best suits you and your situation. Don't like heat? Don't go to the equator. Don't like rain? Don't travel during the monsoon season. All right, you never want to travel during the monsoon season, but you get my point. And of course, it's important to match your ideal travel plans with your money personality. If you have a limited budget but want to travel in style, you might consider a country that has an established tourism economy, but it isn't as popular as most of the well-known destinations. That way, you can choose a place where your money will go the farthest, but still offers all the day spas and surfing lessons and city tours that you want. On the other hand, if you're really interested in learning more about the history of a certain place, but maybe can't afford to go to places like Europe where the entrance costs tend to be steep, you can choose a country that offers free or cheap museum entrances. At this point, you have something of a profile that your target country must fit. Maybe it looks like this. Things I really want: good weather, a beach, cheap places for shopping, a good variety of food and vegetarian dishes. Most of the people speak English. Hotels are not too expensive. Good public transportation or walkable. Flights aren't too expensive. The no-nos: humidity, too much rain, big cities. I'm flexible about a good nightlife, cafes, access to Wi-Fi. This profile is going to help you immensely when you research possible countries to visit. 9. Talk to everyone you know who has traveled. People who have traveled are amazing sources of wisdom, inspiration, and sometimes resources. And it doesn't matter if this person has traveled to places you have never thought of going yourself. Maybe you had never considered traveling to Brazil, but it just so happens that your neighbor has family there who's more than willing to take you in. On the other hand, if you know a person who has traveled to a country you are considering, maybe you can get a feel of whether your ideal profile matches up with their experience. You might have had the idea that a certain place had good public transportation, for instance, until you talk to someone who can tell you from personal experience that the buses are a nightmare and the subway system never functions normally. 10. Hop on a tour or go rogue. For a lot of people, traveling with a tour or travel company is a good option, especially if you don't have experience traveling. It can be nice to have someone there all the time to help you navigate this whole new landscape. Of course, tours are often pretty expensive, and there are other cons like a lack of freedom and the inevitability that you'll be shown only the really touristy stuff. On the other hand, going it alone can also be kind of overwhelming, especially if you don't speak the language. A good option might be to join a tour for the first part of your trip and then stay in the country on your own afterwards. This way, the first few days will be spent in the comfort of a group, and you'll be able to explore on your own later. 11. Research other opportunities. More than ever before, there are opportunities for young people looking to explore the world through volunteering, studying, or working abroad. You can sign up for short foreign exchange programs, longer-term volunteering commitments, or even work and travel companies. A quick glance at your options online can be both exhilarating and overwhelming. Ultimately, you're going to have to do the bulk of the research to decide what's available to you, but here's a brief rundown of the options out there. Volunteering. There are plenty of global organizations committed to making a difference around the world, whether that means showing up in the wake of natural disasters or addressing more persistent societal issues. Some organizations are more geared towards short-term projects, while others will require a longer process. The United Nations Volunteer Program, for instance, allows you to apply to a pool of volunteers who may be called at any time to assist in disaster relief. Programs like Teachers Without Borders or the Peace Corps, on the other hand, require longer commitments and usually allow you to be more immersed in the country where you volunteer. Obviously, this travel option is not for everyone. The work can be quite difficult, emotionally and physically, but as those who have traveled the world through this venue will tell you, the experience is unmatched. Studying. Studying abroad is a hugely popular option for people of all ages. More and more, universities in developed countries are establishing global campuses or are partnering with universities abroad to create a global education network. That's great news for anyone who loves to travel but doesn't want to put their education on hold. When I was considering which universities to apply to, I looked into the study abroad department to see what my travel opportunities would be. This not only gave me a chance to enhance my learning by studying in a completely different context for a semester, but it also made my degree more competitive upon graduating. And when I was attending a graduate program in New York, one of the most expensive places to live in the country, I was actually able to save money by spending 6 months in South America, where the cost of living is lower. But don't worry, you don't have to be affiliated with a university to study abroad. There are plenty of universities who are open to foreign students who are simply looking to take a language course. The advantage of doing this is that you may apply for a student visa and thus be able to stay in a country for longer than a tourist visa. Working. Working can be a tricky thing to accomplish abroad, but again, it's become much easier in recent years. That's because there are programs that recruit young people to work abroad for up to 1 year at a time. There are different names for these programs, and there are new ones popping up all the time, but the basic formula is the same. You apply for the World Abroad program and, if selected, you spend the next year traveling the world while working on online projects in a variety of fields. While programs like this often require some fees, you're able to travel without having to plan things like accommodations, travel staff, and transportation. If you're not interested in going through a work abroad program, there are certain countries that allow you to apply for a working visa. Right now, New Zealand and Australia are two big destinations for working holiday visas in which you can apply for a year-long visa that will allow you to live and work in the country. Other places like Argentina will allow you to apply fairly easily for a work visa if you've been sponsored by a company there. The more you look into work visas in the country that interests you, the more you'll see that there are definitely ways to work abroad. Obviously, the work visa option is great if you want to settle down in one place for a while. Having local coworkers allows you to build relationships organically and gives you a chance to see what it's really like to live in the community. If you are looking to perfect your language skills, it can be a real sink or swim experience, but one that will definitely benefit you in the long run. Once you've figured out the visa requirements to get started finding a job in the country you want to visit, simply take a look online or on listing websites like Craigslist. Often, employers know that foreigners look to these sites for jobs, so you can frequently find jobs that require English, like teaching or positions at international companies. Another option for working abroad, one that I've used on every trip I've ever taken, is to freelance online. There are a ton of websites out there that allow you to work online and be paid in dollars, which is a huge asset when you're on the move. As long as you have access to a stable internet, you're able to take on projects and earn money. So, unlike the work visa option, which requires you to stay in one place for a set period of time, working online as a freelancer gives you the freedom to move around more frequently. Even if you don't think you have the skills to do freelance work, I can assure you there's something online for everyone. Transcription work is a great place to start because it requires little skill. You're simply listening to an audio recording and writing down what you hear, even if it's not one of the better paid jobs out there. You can also find work writing, editing, graphic design, social media marketing, research, and legal consulting. Two of the more popular websites out there are Upwork and Guru. The key when it comes to researching your opportunities is to keep an open mind. If you see a job opening or volunteer program that you have never considered before, I invite you to challenge yourself. Okay, pause. In the first 11 steps, you've gathered a lot of data about what your trip might look like. At this point, you know more or less what kind of country you want to go to and what kind of experience you want to have. You've thought about how much money you'd like to spend, and you also have an idea of what you'd like to do with your time in your target country. It's time for Stage 2. Stage 2. These next steps are intended to help you further solidify your plans so that you can narrow down exactly when you're leaving, how long you'll be in your target country, and what you'll be doing when you get there. 12. Find the right season to travel. Assuming that you're traveling outside of the parameters of a volunteer study program that requires a specific start date, you'll want to think about the best time of year to go. Even if you're going to a place that you assume is warm all year round, you should consider if there's a rainy season. Or if you're heading to the beach, keep an eye out for things like seasonal kelp growth. Obviously, seasonal changes can provide some advantages too, like flower blooming or wildlife migration. So just keep an eye on it. 13. Look into the target country's political and cultural landscape. Some countries will shut down certain necessary services for national holidays or large events like elections. Others will shut down entire sections of tourist destinations for restoration projects. There are also some cultural events that tend to take place at different moments of the year, which can either make your trip more difficult or make it way better. For instance, if you travel to a country in the middle of a mass pilgrimage, you might find that traveling is suddenly expensive and difficult. On the other hand, if you're prepared for it, it can be a wonderful opportunity to be a witness to the cultural practices of the world. 14. Solidify your travel dates. This is one of those steps that is going to depend totally on your own situation. If you have the flexibility, maybe you would consider booking a one-way or a flight with a flexible return date. Otherwise, you'll need to find the right travel dates for your job, school, or other responsibilities. I would suggest that if you have to come back to work or school at the end of your trip, that you give yourself a full 24 hours after your flight home to rest. This will also give you a buffer in case your flight is delayed or you face some other obstacle. 15. Download flight apps and purchase your tickets. There are plenty of apps out there that can help you track possible flights. Many even have a feature that tells you the best time to buy. And while this is such an exciting step, I know it can also feel like a punch in the gut. Plane tickets can be expensive, but if you plan your trip well and stay committed to your budget, it's likely to be the biggest purchase of your trip. A few tips here. 1. Buy the more expensive ticket option with flexibility and insurance. I used to save money by purchasing non-refundable, non-insured tickets, but after my last experience of spending 4 hours on the phone, paying the price for the international phone call with the airline to try to get a few extra days on my trip only to be told that there was nothing I could do, I won't make that mistake again. The extra expense allows you to be flexible and gives you peace of mind. In my opinion, it's worth the price. 2. Look at the baggage restrictions before you purchase. The last time I was traveling from Southeast Asia to South America, I automatically chose the cheapest ticket, assuming that international baggage restrictions would be similar. Boy, was I wrong. I realized a few days before my trip that I only had paid for 15 kilos of weight, and I had to pay an extra $150 at the airport. So while it may be cringeworthy to purchase the tickets with more baggage now, it's better to deal with the expense now than at the airport, where you might already be stressed. 3. Pay attention to layovers. For longer travels, I actually enjoy 1 or 2 layovers to break up the monotony and allow me to stretch my legs. It's also an interesting experience to see what other airports are like. And if you have enough time, venture out for a mini adventure. Of course, be very mindful of visa restrictions. Some countries require you to purchase a visa even if you're just passing through the airport. Now that you know where you're going and actually have your flights, it's time to take a little break for a dance party. Seriously, you've taken a huge step towards your goal going abroad. Everything from this point on is the fun stuff. Organizing your trip, meeting friends, eating all the food, taking all the pictures. So take a moment to acknowledge that. Once you've had your mini celebration, it's time to move on to the 3rd phase of the planning process. Stage 3. In this stage, your job is to prepare yourself for the trip. It doesn't matter how far your trip is from the current moment. Getting these things out of the way will save you so much stress later on. 16. Start learning the language. Even if you think that you speak the local language of the place that you're going, chances are it's going to be much different than you think. If you're an American going to Australia, for instance, there will be phrases you don't understand. If you studied Spanish in high school, you likely don't learn the dialects that you'll encounter in South America. Countries have their own sayings and colloquialisms, so it's a good idea to get familiar with them as soon as possible. There are a few ways to do this. If you don't speak the language at all, sign up for a class or download a language app. Watch movies that you've already seen a few times. My go-tos are really familiar movies like Disney movies or Harry Potter in the new language. If you do speak the language, regardless of your level of fluency, reacquaint yourself with it by watching television shows or subscribing to podcasts from the target country. This will open your ears to the accent and introduce you to some of the cultural differences. 17. Consider traveling with a friend and then reconsider. You'll notice that I listed this option after you've solidified your travel plans. And that's on purpose, because when you start to bend over backwards to accommodate your travel plans to another person, it's much more likely that the entire plan will fall through. Instead, it's much better to plan your own way, and then open the trip up to your friends if they can join you. That might seem a bit harsh to you, and, as always, you should allow yourself some flexibility, especially if you know your friends are reliable. But the fact is, I've seen a lot of friendships become strained as one friend saves up enough money to backpack through Europe, while the other one promises that next summer they'll actually be able to go. After a few summers have passed, both realize that it's probably never going to happen. There's another consideration here too, and that has to do with the inherent stressors that come with traveling. When you travel with friends, even if you're super close back home, You'll notice that you have different ways of dealing with challenges like getting lost, having to deal with cultural differences, or simply planning activities. And if you butt heads at any point in the trip because of these stressors, it can make for a really awkward arrangement. I understand the draw of traveling with a close friend. The memories you can make together can be wonderful and bring you closer together. Just keep in mind that things may not go the way you planned, and you might have to make some adjustments in order to protect the friendship. Maybe you have to be a bit more patient than usual. On the other hand, traveling alone has its own pros and cons. The pros are freedom and flexibility. You know that you can go to whatever monuments or attractions you want, or if you want to have a lazy day, you won't feel obligated to pack in a ton of activities. A big con, of course, is traveling alone can be intimidating. You have to make all the decisions and figure things out on your own if you hit a snag. But consider this too. Traveling alone will prompt you to reach out and make new friends. And when you have to figure things out on your own, you're more likely to ask the locals for guidance, which will allow you to make new connections and potentially practice your second language. It's all about your comfort level. I believe that traveling with friends can be great, but it can also go south quickly and prevent you from having the trip that you always wanted for yourself. If you're traveling with someone else because you're worried about what it would be like to be on your own, I would invite you to step out of your comfort zone a bit. After all, you are the protagonist of this trip. Why not try exploring on your own? 18. Look into your housing options. This is a pretty big consideration, so take your time on this step to find the right place to stay. A dingy hotel room can ruin a vacation, and a modest hostel can exceed your expectations. So do your research and consider all your options. In a moment, we're going to go over what those options are, but first a few tips on what to look for in accommodations. Location. It does you no good to book accommodations that are far away from attractions that you want to see, so it's important to explore a map at the very beginning of your search for the right place to stay. That way, you can narrow your search down to specific neighborhoods or draw out a radius from the area that you want to be. Sometimes that will mean that you have to stay in more expensive places, but it's better to spend a bit more on accommodations than to have to worry about paying for transportation or giving up other important considerations like safety. Reviews. After location, the reviews that you'll find about a certain area or lodging will be crucial to your search. Luckily, whether you're looking at a hotel, hostel, or Airbnb, you should be able to find reviews online. Now, the only caveat about reviews is that they can be somewhat biased. After all, it's generally only the cranky people who leave bad reviews. The people who are happy may not feel as inspired to leave a note. Of course, you can find good information from both bad and good reviews, and you'll learn a lot about customer service based on how the host responds. Price. When you're planning your trip, it can be easy to gravitate towards the very cheapest hotels and hostels, but don't just settle on the lowest price, because here's the likely outcome. You get to the place that was the cheapest online, only to realize that you can't imagine spending more than 20 minutes there. So you go to book something else for a much higher price simply because you're desperate. Obviously, you don't want to shell out too much money either. So here's a good rule of thumb. Find the average rate for bookings in the area, and then look for something slightly cheaper. Don't go for the radically cheap, but rather something 10 to 15% cheaper than the average. At that price, you're saving money without running the risk of staying at a dump. Extras. If you're really in a pinch between a couple of different options, consider the extras that are offered. Things like air conditioning in hot climates, free breakfasts, and flexible check-ins and check-outs can make or break a good accommodation. And while it may not seem like a big deal now, on-site laundry is a huge advantage. If you're traveling for more than a week, you'll likely need to wash a few things, and every country has a different system for laundry. You might be able to find self-service laundry places in some areas, but having a washing machine or laundry service on-site will make the process so much simpler. Now, with these considerations in mind, you can think about what type of housing option will be best for you. Here are the pros and cons of each. Airbnb. There's a reason why this option has become so popular over the past few years. It's convenient, it's safe, it's cheap. And when you're traveling abroad, it can be really interesting to stay in someone else's home. It gives you the opportunity to learn more about the culture while also giving you freedom and autonomy. Pretty much the only downside to this option is that it can sometimes be uncomfortable to stay in someone's house, especially if you're renting a room in a larger house. No matter how comfortable the host will try to make you, you might not shake the feeling that you're in someone else's space. If that sounds okay to you, then this is a good option. Just make sure to check the rules or ask the host any questions you have before booking. Hostels. This option has gained a reputation for being the prime accommodation for backpackers because they tend to be really cheap. But that doesn't always mean that hostels are dirty or run down, or that you have to share a room with 10 other people. There are plenty of hostels where you can book your own room and where the owners have really made cleanliness a priority. There's as much variety in hostels as any other housing option. You just have to do your research to find a good one. If you've never stayed in a hostel, here's the rundown. You book a bed in a shared room or a private room and share other spaces like the kitchen, living area, and bathrooms. There are no dedicated maids and just a few staff to make reservations and check people in and out. That means that cleanliness is really up to the guests. If you make a meal in the kitchen, it's up to you to do the dishes and put everything back in its place. If you take a shower and the water gets all over the floor, you'll need to take the extra 5 minutes to mop it up so that the next person doesn't slip. When you think about it, these really aren't big inconveniences. They are things that you would do in your own home. Hostels have some great benefits. You have the chance to meet people from all over the world. You can enjoy a laid-back atmosphere. You have the opportunity to save money by cooking for yourself, and many hostels offer special events. In fact, when I was staying at a hostel in Uruguay, the hosts offered to cook an asado, a traditional barbecue of meat and vegetables for the guests in the backyard. Some hostels in San Francisco offer walking tours around the city. And even more informally, you'll likely to be invited to outings with the other hostel goers. I'm not sure what it is, but there's something about staying in a hostel that makes people social. Everyone is there to explore, learn, and have a good time. It's all about finding the right hostel. This is where the price, location, and reviews will help you out a lot. Hostels that are very cheap and are located in off-the-beaten-path areas are probably not going to be a great experience for you. And of course, read through the reviews. If a hostel doesn't have any reviews, simply look for one that does. You'll be happy you did. Hotels. This housing option has become pretty unpopular with young people over the past decade, and that's mostly because we really can't afford them. Sure, hotels are great. They offer privacy and nice extras like continental breakfast, and maybe a pool. But they tend to be way more expensive than hostels or Airbnbs. One thing that I recommend is that if you're going to be traveling for more than 2 or 3 weeks, you might book a hotel for 1 or 2 nights of your stay. This is kind of a reset button. Having the luxury of staying in a hotel will rejuvenate you. Sometimes, simply having a hot shower and fresh linens in a hotel is enough to replenish your energy halfway through a trip. And obviously, staying for 1 night or 2 nights won't break the bank. Couchsurfing or host families. There are websites that are dedicated to matching you with hosts who are willing to let you sleep on their couch or in a spare room for free. At first, this option scares a lot of people off. Why would someone open their home to a stranger for free? But in practice, you'll find that the hosts tend to be generous, friendly people. Many of them are travelers themselves and have benefited from someone else's generosity in the past. And this can be a really rewarding experience. Again, when you stay with someone in their home, you have the opportunity to learn more about the culture. 19. Write out your list of activities. Now that you've got your travel dates and your living situation all figured out, it's time to do the fun part, figuring out what you want to do. If you're like me, this step can very quickly become way too detailed, so ease up a little bit. You don't want to plan your trip out hour by hour, but instead, you want a list of things you would like to do. Seriously, if you start planning out your trip in too much detail right now, you'll likely get frustrated when you get to the country and realize you have to throw your plan out the window because you didn't know enough about how things actually work abroad. Putting it all together. What did you learn in Chapter 1? This chapter was all about exploring your options. Here's the rundown. Find out what you want in a vacation. Make sure your paperwork is in order. Find out what you can afford and start saving now. Ask around for advice and guidance from people who have traveled. Explore your options for having your trip funded in part or fully through volunteer opportunities, study abroad, or work programs. Book your flight. Figure out where to stay. Final thoughts on pre-planning. If there's one thing I hope that you take away from this pre-planning section, it would be that you have so many options available to you. You can really tailor this trip to your needs and desires. And although not everything is going to pan out the way that you expect, it is so exciting to see that there are plenty of opportunities to make this trip everything you want it to be. Perhaps you were surprised that planning out your trip took 21 steps. That's quite a lot of information to consider for something that looks so simple in the movies. But don't worry. Once you have all these details ironed out, the only thing left for you to do is to pack up and get going. You're well on your way to having the trip of your dreams, and now you don't have to stress about things like organizing your trip and figuring out where you'll be staying each night. And in the long run, doing this legwork will actually save you money.